It's barbaric. The ancient Greeks have been talking about this for thousands of years now. There's Socrates and there's Achilles. Only primitives lack knowledge of how houses turn to face the sun. How your home turns to face the sun is arguably the most important thing in the design of your own home. If you get this right, you'll be saving money on your heating and energy bills, and you'll also be saving the planet at the same time. But more importantly, you'll feel comfortable in your own home. So in this video, I'm going to teach you 3 things. 1, how to predict exactly where the sun is at any time, any day of the year. And 2, how to plan your house accordingly. And then 3, how to have your cake and eat it at the same time. What I meant was how to keep out the hot sun during the warmer season and let in the sun during the colder seasons. So to predict the sun movement, back in the day we'd have to take out our protractors and rulers and read these complex sun charts, but now we have an app for that. And today I'm going to show you an example from andrewmarsh.com. This is an example of a house in Sydney, and that's north right there, south down the page, west and east. And that yellow band is basically the path of the sun throughout the year. This red dot here is the sun, and the blue line is where it's pointing at, and you can see the shadow. And this red line here is the path of the sun on a specific day. And right now that specific day is winter solstice on the 25th of June. Now for those of you that live in the northern hemisphere, bear with me, I'll get to you, but just know that in the southern hemisphere, the sun shines from the north most of the time. And it's the opposite in the northern hemisphere, it shines from the south most of the time. You can see that the sun rises around the northeast and then also sets around the northwest. So let's animate that. There we go. So that's how the sun moves during the winter solstice. Now let's have a look at how the sun moves on the other extreme, on the summer solstice. So right off the bat, you can see how the sun rises at a very different position. It looks like the sun rises very close to the southeast, and then it also sets around the southwest. So you can see that some sun will get into that south window there. But I want you to look at how high the sun gets when it gets to noon. So you can see that's almost directly above the house. Compared to when it was in the winter solstice, it's a bit more further out. And I need you to remember this because we'll talk about this in the third part of the video. But essentially what I want to show you from this diagram is that during the cooler months of the year, the sun will be pretty low around this lower half of the yellow band. And during the warmer parts of the year, the sun will be pretty high up around the upper half of this band. So let's go through that again with a side-on view. So like I said, generally the warmer parts of the year, the sun lies around here. And during the cooler parts of the year, the sun rises around this end of the solar path. And let's have a look at that in plan view. In the winter, the sun rises around the northeast, and then it sets around the northwest. So that was the sun path for Sydney. Now let's go around the world and check out other countries. So here is the solar path diagram of Sydney, and what you're looking at is the summer solstice in red, and here's the winter solstice in red. But watch how this changes as we move to the northern hemisphere. So let's have a look at LA. LA is pretty much a mirror of Sydney. Winter solstice in here, and summer solstice here. It rises from the east, goes a little bit to the south, and then goes back to the west. And if you look at New Delhi, it's pretty much the same. But once you go to a country near the equator, such as Singapore, look how interesting this looks. During the summer solstice, the sun is always on the north side, but on the winter solstice, the sun is always on the south side. And let's go to somewhere even more extreme, like Iceland. Look at that. So during the summer solstice, the day is super long. The sun rises at around 1 o'clock, and then it ends around 11 o'clock. But during the winter, there's barely any sun at all. The sun only rises at around 11 o'clock, and then they only have that 3 hours of sunlight. That's insane. So if you know anyone that lives in those parts of the world, drop a comment below. I want to know how it's like. So now that you know how the sun moves, and that it's drastically different depending on where you are, you'll understand that you just can't buy or copy a plan off the shelf and expect it to work anywhere. Now I'm going to use this example from Sydney again to explain what you should think about when planning your home. So the general recommendation is to have your living areas in the north here, because that's where most people spend the most of the time. The rooms here get plenty of sun throughout the year. The sun will keep these areas warm in the winter, and you won't have to turn on the light during the day. You also want your outdoor spaces, such as your backyard, facing north, especially if you have a garden, because these areas here will get plenty of sunlight throughout the year. Imagine you had a backyard in the south. Your sun would be overshadowing your own backyard throughout the year. We had this client that had a beautiful waterfront property, but probably the worst arrangement you could have is to have a property that slopes down away from the street and the backyard is facing south. In Sydney, we have our southerly prevailing winds, so even though they had big glass sliding doors, they could never open it because it was too windy, so it was always dark and cold there. It was a pity because they had a space with a nice view, but that space wasn't comfortable enough to enjoy. So the general recommendation is to have your bedrooms on the south instead. But if you want some morning sunlight into your bedrooms, then you might want to have your bedrooms on the east to get some morning light. And for the western side, in Sydney, this is where we receive the afternoon sun, the hottest time of the day, so the rooms on this side of the house would get rather warm, especially in the summer. So the general recommendation is to place your laundry, your bathrooms, your storage rooms, the rooms where you don't spend a lot of time in. You could also place the garage or the carport on the western side to block the sun from directly hitting your house. But everyone's lifestyles are different. You might be a night shift worker, you might only come home during the early mornings to sleep, and you don't want any sunlight in your bedroom at all. Or maybe that you're a baker and you wake up before the sunrise and you're almost never home during the day and you only get home in the afternoon. So maybe you want to design a nice spot in the northwest corner of your home for you to play your guitar in the warmer winter sun. But let's look at that in more detail. So while this might be nice in winter, but let's have a look at this in section. You'll be letting a lot of winter sunlight in, which is nice, but without proper shading, you'll also be letting a lot of summer sun in. So the first option is to plant some deciduous trees. These are special trees that shed leaves during the cooler months, so it will allow you some sunlight through it. But during the warmer months, the leaves will grow back and shade you when you need it the most. But if that's not an option, we have other shading devices. So let's have a look at a north wall first. So if you remember from the 3D diagram earlier, the sun is very low during the winter and it's very high during the hotter months. So what you can do on this north wall is to have a simple roof overhang that blocks out most of the high summer sun but lets in the low winter sun. You don't actually have to have the roof overhang that comes out this far. You can actually have it a little bit further back, and it really just depends. But I thought it would be nice to have a large overhang to create a veranda so you can have a fully open window or a door and not have rain come in. But it also creates a shaded space out here to allow someone to sit outside during the hot summer. However, on the western side, it's a bit more tricky to shade from the summer sun. That's because in the afternoon around 6 o'clock, the sun gets really low. Let's have a look at this on the side-on view. See how low that sun is? You actually have a large overhang to be able to block all that sun out. So that's where vertical shading devices come in. So if you had some vertical louvers on this side of the wall here, you would be able to block out all that sun without a large overhang. And the beauty of this is that while it blocks out the summer sun, it won't be blocking out the winter sun. And it will also give you some privacy from your neighbors, especially if they have a window very close by. And if you want to keep the sun out on the east side, you would use the same method. But I personally don't want any sunlight in my bedroom, but I do want a little bit in my kitchen. Just this little. I don't need the sun on my face, but just enough to light up my bench top would be enough. That's because every morning I have a coffee brewing routine. I wake up genuinely excited to go to this little corner of my house. In the past few days, I've had a few cloudy, gloomy mornings. So when the sunlight actually comes in, it really adds to the experience. You can see the steam coming out of the coffee, and I think it just looks amazing. So now that you understand how the sun and air moves, in my next video, I'm going to talk about how to find the best apartment based on these solar passive design principles. But if you haven't watched the last video on air and ventilation, click here and subscribe.